Welcome to episode 71 of the Filmumentaries podcast. This is Jamie Benning talking to you here from my house in London. It's still March 2023, just about. This is the second episode of the month. If this is your first time listening to the podcast, welcome. You have about an hour or so of film history chat ahead. Please do check out some, or maybe all, of the previous 70 episodes. There are some good ones and some great ones. No bad ones as far as I'm concerned. Each of them gives you a unique insight into the film industry and the people behind the scenes. If you're a regular listener, thanks as always for joining me and for your continued support. If any of you like my work, and this is work, then please visit patreon.com/Jamie Benning, where there are several tiers to choose from in helping the podcast. Some of those tiers have perks and merchandise too. Thanks to my new patron this month. I'm back up to 98 of you supporting the podcast. I think I got to about 105 at one point. If I could just double that, I could start to focus more on the podcast and perhaps get more episodes out each month and focus on getting more and more interesting stories that I can find. I mean, it's going quite well already, but it would be great if I could do that with your help. And talking of merch, you can also support the podcast by buying some Filmumentaries goods, including mugs, t-shirts, bags, bottles, and even socks. Also, t-shirts with Inside Jabba and Inside Jaws posters on them that my friend and long-term collaborator Pete Starling designed back in the day for me. As I've said in previous episodes, why not buy one for your next film convention? Star Wars Celebration is coming up. You might be the only one wearing one of these t-shirts. And if I see you, because I might be there, more details on that soon, I might be there. If I do see you, then you get a high five automatically from me, whether you want it or not. I may be going, as I said, to Star Wars Celebration. Not usually my thing, conventions, but I may have a good reason to go. More on that soon, hopefully. All that and more can be found at filmumentaries.creator-spring.com. Catchy, huh? I'll post a link to that in the show notes as well as the Patreon, and I'd appreciate your support if you can. So for this episode, I spoke with Van Ling, a name you may recognise, perhaps for his work on laserdisc, DVD and Blu-ray, perhaps for his collaborations with James Cameron on the Abyss and Terminator 2. Oh, you'll love the story of how he got started with Cameron. I had no idea, and I have some pictures to prove it. That's not as dodgy as I made it just sound then. Or maybe for his time working for VFX house banned from the Ranch Entertainment on films like Dante's Peak or The Relic. Either way, you'll find his eclectic career fascinating, I'm sure. I spoke with Van just before we had our trip to LA. We were hoping to meet up with Van for lunch while we were out there, but our schedule was made even tighter because we ended up getting a few interviews we didn't think we were going to get. We didn't have plans to get them, but suddenly doors were opened. So maybe next time, Van, it would be great to meet you. So here's my interview with Van Ling, disc creator, VFX supervisor, director as well, and I'll be back at the end for a bit more jabbering on. Van, what was your path to USC? When were you first aware that you wanted to become a part of filmmaking?
I think filmmaking and visual effects and things were really on my radar all the way back as a kid. I used to watch Star Trek in reruns, and of course I was into disaster films of the 70s because my first PG-rated movie in my life was The Poseidon Adventure in 1973. So there was just so many amazing things about the movies and television and Ray Harryhausen films, watching those and all of this kind of thing kind of really set me up in the 70s for wanting to do that. Then, of course, Star Wars comes out, and that changes everything for so many people, including myself, where all of a sudden there was this right-in-your-face entertainment that was a completely new paradigm. It wasn't stately shots and grand miniatures with slow push-ins and matte paintings. It was this kinetic, exciting, real life feeling kind of world. And that kind of sealed it for myself and so many other people. and I resolved to get into visual effects and to get into filmmaking. So, did the standard, make a lot of, home movies and try to do a lot of experimental things, trying to replicate shots, your favorite shots, all of those kind of things. And it was crazy. I was using a regular 8 millimeter wind up camera that my father had from way back. So, you would be able to have a single frame feature so I could do animation or play with it. And you try to get all your mistakes out when you're younger.
Yeah.
And it was a challenge because of course we didn't have video, we didn't have anything that was instantaneous. Everything was, you got to experiment with this. You spend your time shooting something and then you send it in to a lab, hope they don't mess it up, and get back and go, should have done this, and you learn from it. And that was the process. I actually would joke with some of my other colleagues in the industry where we look at what is available to folks today, and just say, you guys better be making the best things in the world because you have tools we would have killed for back in the old days.
I do wonder though, some of those limitations that you had. What year are we talking now? We're talking like late 70s, I guess. You're talking about Star Wars there, so 77 and sort of going across into the 80s. I mean, I wonder back then, because of the tools available to you, that you were more thoughtful about what you did, and it was a more kind of cerebral experience rather than, this instant feedback and instant gratification that people get now.
Yeah. It's very interesting because it had to be a lot more considered. Often it wasn't, but it was at least things that you could try, and you understood a cost to it because you had to pay for each roll of film. You could mess it up, you could accidentally expose it, you could do all sorts of things and not get what you want. You do have the ability to record over it. And all of these things, I think you're right. You're absolutely right. It makes a difference that we have the ability now to essentially on our phones, on our portable phones, shoot, write, shoot, create, and distribute to the entire world with the click of a button. And it, in a way, devalues some of it because, you see a lot of stuff out there that is not edited, is not crafted in any way. And it's just terrible. So you have to figure out how to address those things. You're absolutely right. There's a discipline that comes with that process. And I fortunately grew up with that kind of discipline. So hopefully I'm not wasting as much film or tape or digital these days, but it's a lesson that's really worth learning because you have to go through so much just to get something out there. The technology used to be the barrier to entry. Now it's not. It's the starting point for so many people. And it's made it possible for a lot of really amazing things to happen and for people with talent to be able to get out there that they never would have had that chance.
Yeah, true.
On the flip side, it means there's 1,000-fold more junk out there. Even when movies were made, you would say that 10% of it was any good and 1% of it was great. Multiply that by just the overall volume change, but those proportions have not changed. So that's one of the interesting challenges that we have today.
And when did you finally get to USC and kind of put all this practice that you've been doing at home, into something more heading towards more of a profession?
Well, I was in high school and graduated in 1982, which was right at the height of everything. That was the summer of E.T., Tron, Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, Poltergeist, so many things. So there was this heyday. And I was fortunate enough to get accepted to the USC School of Cinema, Lucas's alma mater, of course, which of course was the goal of so many of us.
And by that time, I imagine it was very competitive to get in there. Just sorry to jump in, but I'm just, I've spoken to people, who went through USC around the same time as George or just after George. But by the time you reach 1982, I can imagine the numbers of people applying versus the numbers of places available, was a very different kettle of fish altogether.
Well, there were a number of competing schools, and they had all different styles. There were schools in New York, and they were very more art edgy kind of, Scorsese kind of movies. You had others who were very much into the cerebral experimental kind of movies. And then you had USC, which was the one that had the most industry ties. And that was one of the things I think that was the most practical
Mm.
from my standpoint, that made it something that I wanted to try to get into. So I was fortunate enough to get accepted. I was also on scholarship for my general education for various stuff from high school, and so I went to film school. Did my first 2 years as usual, undergrad as a just general education,
Hmm.
and then the last 2 years of my 4 years was in the film school. This was the original film school, the stables,
Hmm.
uh, with the graffitied "Reality Ends Here" over the front door. The horse stables that they used to be on campus. And they were still this in the middle of all this other stuff at USC, in the middle of downtown, near downtown LA, was this rambling old wooden set of stables with a central courtyard. And so I spent my first 2 years, even though I was in general ed at the time, I was doing, all the kind of preparatory film classes, the film history and criticism, and the history of American film, history of world cinema, all those kind of things, out of this old building. So I got to be in that environment where there were all these traditions from back in the day, and everybody wrote graffiti on the walls in the editing bullpen, and it was this kind of ramshackle department, in the middle of this big university that was known as a party school.
Hmm.
And most of the people who were in the cinema school wanted really nothing to do with the rest of the school, because they used to call it the University of Spoiled Children. That was the nickname that all the other schools, other colleges in the area, UCLA in particular, would call USC, because it had a lot of the scions of business, the kids, and all that kind of thing, and a lot of those would not really be taking the education seriously. It's part of their process to getting their inheritance or whatever. That wasn't my background at all. It was so different to see a lot of these folks, where the old joke was, if you bought the textbook, you got a C. If you opened the textbook, you got a B. If you read the textbook, you get an A, kind of thing. And in the midst of all that, we were at the cinema school, and the cinema school was this completely different entity. It was all of these very inquisitive, hungry people, competitive people trying to do things. The school was really interesting. And halfway through, after 2 years, I was right at the time in which they were building the new cinema school.
Right.
And that was the George Lucas instructional building, and the Steven Spielberg scoring stage, and the Marshall Lucas editing post-production building. And they built this whole new thing. So I spent my first 2 years with one foot in the old, and then my last 2 years in the new, brand new building, and they modeled it plan-wise exactly the same as the old one. It's just now it was a multi-story building, and had a quad and the whole thing. So I kind of got the best of both worlds in that sense. That school has since been torn down and changed, and now they have a huge cinema school that has become an entirely different entity. And there is something, amazing to see that journey, because now you go to the cinema school, and they still have the Reality Ends Here, but it's carved like a Roman tablet above this gigantic building with marble columns. So it's interesting to see that the feel, the idea is still there, but the feel has completely changed.
Yeah, yeah. And did you get a chance to kind of specialize in something in that final year? Did you know by now that you were kind of heading towards visual effects? Because from what I gather from people that have been to USC, it gives you a very good range of all the different parts of filmmaking. and you come out with experience across all this broad spectrum of disciplines. But do you get an opportunity to
Yeah,
focus on one towards the end?
you do, but visual effects is not one of them.
Right.
Back in my day, there was literally not a single visual effects class available in the curriculum when I was there. There was always one listed in the syllabus as something you could take, but they never had it when I was there. It was after I left that they had a few people who really pushed for it, and they had one or two of them. But when I was there was no such thing. The closest there was an animation class,
I guess
which
everybody
I took. Yeah.
that could do it was doing it for real, in the industry itself.
Well, yeah, although it was interesting because none of it was computer. It was all practical, but nobody thought it was a large enough niche back then. It was always writing, directing, editing, sound, cinematography, production management. Those were kind of the areas that you had to pick. And I was gravitating more towards editorial because post-production, you get more involved in that kind of thing. But, we were all doing visual effects stuff on the fly, just being inspired by the movies and all the things that were happening throughout the 80s. And which was really kind of the golden age of visual effects on a physical level, miniatures and pyrotechnics and motion control and all of that. So so I was there at this high point for that technology. So it was something you'd get really immersed in learning about, but not in school. You were learning all the fundamentals, which I have to say is the most important thing. It's so easy to get lost in the technology that you don't really know how to tell stories. And so that's why it was actually a good thing. I didn't actually work. My specialty in my last year was not editing. It turns out I was doing sound because there were 9 people on a crew, and they were all split down into these various categories. There'd be 2 editors, and they had to be 2 sound people, and all the other positions were filled. So I took sound, and but it was still post-production, and it was really eye-opening to learn how many things you can do in the storytelling just with sound. And so again, it's part of that process of manipulating reality, where you can do it in sound in ways that you can't even do it visually. I mean, you can now, but it was really a great experience because it gave you a well-rounded idea. And one of the things that's the hardest to deal with sometimes today is that people are so specialized that they don't know how their part fits in with everything else. If you're a compositor, it helps if you know how how the shot got to where you are and what the point of the shot is. Not just composite this on top of that. It's what is the feeling? What is the dramatic intent? What is the storytelling of every single shot that you're working on? And how do you help the overall thing? And a lot of people, don't necessarily see that. And so getting a well-rounded idea of how films are made in general really helps whatever task you're doing, because then you're working towards a whole as opposed to just a bunch of disparate parts where you're not invested in everything.
And the tools become the tools as a means to an end. You've actually got an end point, rather than saying I don't know After Effects or Blender or whatever. You're more thinking about the composition. You're more thinking about how that effect is going to tell the story most effectively. Yeah. Great to come out with those kind of disciplines into a job with James Cameron. I mean, was that your first job out of USC?
That was my yes and no. The first job I had out of USC was as a PA on a film called Alan Quatermain and the Lost City of Gold.
I've never heard of it, but it sounds quite grand.
It is the sequel to King Solomon's Mines, starring Richard Chamberlain.
Yeah, of course.
And I got the gig right out of college because I had gotten a scholarship from the Robert Greenberg Scholarship, and his son, who administered it, Michael Greenberg, was at the time married to Sharon Stone, who was the female lead in Alan Quatermain and the Lost City of Gold. And so part of their scholarship was also getting a summer PA's job on the show. So I got to do that. And the other thing, because that was only a few weeks after that, in graduating, after graduation, I worked at a very small firm called Coffee Table Videos that was trying to do a kind of a That's Hollywood style documentary interview series with famous old stars. And during that summer, I also interned at Doug Trumbull's ShowScan Corporation in the marketing department. So I got to see all the actual ShowScan 65 millimeter, 60 frames per second films that he was doing. He was trying to, again, he was way ahead of his time, and so I got to do a lot of interesting things and rub elbows with very interesting people. And that was the summer that Aliens came out. And that was obviously a huge thing. James Cameron had brought Terminator, the first one, to one of the film classes. And I remember watching this film, and he was there talking about it. He was talking about all these little tricks, and we ended up using three different boys to play the Mexican kid at the end, and it was because of this, and it was just fascinating to hear all the kind of low budget ideas of what you had to do to tell your story. and I thought, wow, here's somebody that when I graduate, I would love to figure out how to get in contact with. Never did per se. And what happened was Aliens came out, and on the first day I saw it twice, and one of my friends, who was a year behind me in film school, said, I know you're into visual effects and technical, gadgetry and stuff. I dare you to build a model of the power loader from Aliens, Big Yellow Walking Forklift. And so I said, okay. And I convinced him over the course of the next few months, because the movie came out in the States in mid-July. And then Halloween is end of October. And he said, I dare you to have this little model ready by then. So it lit a fire under me, and I said, okay. And so I said that's what I was going to do. And on Halloween, I had completed a 7.5-foot costume with motorized arms that moved up and down, and the whole thing. And it was built on a backpack that I wore on my back, and I had these stilts that raised me like a foot off the ground. It wasn't full size, but it was the closest that a recent poor college graduate living at home was going to be able to pull off with foam core and wood and styrofoam.
Yeah.
So I did that. It was a gentleman's bet. I went to his dorm wearing this costume with my car headlights backlighting it and the whole thing, and won that bet. And then went to a costume contest at some nightclub in Glendale, California, won first prize, which almost paid for the cost of building it. And somebody said, hey, you really should show this to James Cameron. And I was like, right, what am I supposed to, how am I going to do that? But over the summer, I had been calling Gail Ann Hurd's office, his wife at the time, who had an office, both of them had an shared office on the 20th Century Fox lot. And I was asking about internships and PA jobs, and they'd always say, no, we don't have anything right now, but, call back next month, which is always nice to hear, because they came from Roger Corman, the Roger Corman school of, whoever can do it, give them a shot, as long as they're cheap, that kind of thing. And so they carried that mentality. And so on Halloween, I called them one last time, and I just said, hey, you have any production assistant jobs? No, we're not in production or anything yet, but you can always call back next month. And I said, oh, one more thing. I built this costume, and I told them what it was. There was dead silence. And then they said, come on down. We got to see this. We'll leave you a pass. So I had to scramble to rent a pickup truck to carry this thing. And got down there like at the end of the day at 5 o'clock. This was before I showed this costume to my friend to win the bet or gone to the nightclub or anything. This was like first time out. And drove it down the 20th Century Fox lot, some of the guards were like, "Oh, they're bringing the prop in." So that was a nice sign. I go up to them, and they're all looking out the windows at me, Gail's staff, while I'm dressing up this thing and wearing it. And they actually sent a Fox photographer over to take a picture with me
Wow.
and Gail in this costume. And so I'm putting on this costume, and they're all looking at me out the windows. I have a couple of friends with me who are helping me put this thing on. And I'm just in my jeans and t-shirt wearing this big yellow styrofoam walking forklift thing. And Gail comes out and says, "This is the best walking resume I've ever seen."
Haha.
And we
Nice.
talk a little bit, and I said, I gotta go. I've got a bet to win at my friend's dorm at USC with this. And she said, "Hang on a second." She goes back inside, comes back out with Sigourney Weaver's jumpsuit costume and Reeboks, those custom high top Reeboks, and says, "You might as well make the costume complete. Just get these back to me
No.
with all the original dirt on them." And back then I was thin enough to actually fit in Sigourney Weaver's costume.
Wow.
So that made a huge impression on me, because here's somebody who's come up through the ranks, has worked at the low budget firms, had the mentality of, rewarding talent, rewarding people who have, the drive.
Mm-hmm.
And that was such a nice, moment of trust.
Mm.
And so everything kind of went from there. Jim was not there. I was so late getting out there that he had to go to another meeting. So 2 weeks after that, I get a call at my parents' house. I was out of town, but there was a message on my parents' answer machine that basically said, "Hello, this is Jim Cameron. I heard you built a power loader worthy of note. I'd like to come see it." And so, a little while later, he comes down in his Corvette to my parents' house, finds me on the floor of the study cutting foam core to help one of my fellow USC students do one of their student projects. And he comes in and immediately says, "Hey, you know how to cut foam core like this?" And he gets down on the floor with the X-Acto knife and is cutting foam core from my friend's student project with me. And so
Cool.
we kind of hit it off. He saw I was an honors student and, liked reading and doing research, and I knew something about visual effects. And so a few weeks later, he said, "How would you like to work for me as my research assistant? I'm
Amazing.
working on a new film idea called The Abyss, and I need to do a lot of research on submarines and marine salvage and oil rigs and, undersea life forms." And that's kind of how it started
Amazing.
for me. And I was with him all the way through the production of the show. It wasn't just doing the research. It was, "Oh, you can do the research? Great. Oh, you know how visual effects works, clearly. Can you help us put together all the visual effects shots?" In terms of, we have Phil Norwood and Steve Berg and Ron Cobb and all folks designing all these things, and John Bruno storyboarding and all of these elements of it. And said, "Here, Van, here are the shots that we've picked. Can you compile them all in a book and do a guide on how we think we should break up the different techniques and everything?" So it's kind of like being a visual effects producer, but on a kind of a test level. And so I got to do that. I created a phone book size notebook called the How and Why Wonder Book of the Abyss that broke down all the shots and how they were supposed to be done, and went over all these things. And Jim would come in and say, "Yeah, that's great. No, maybe we should do this with underwater miniatures as opposed to a dry for wet miniature in smoke, motion control." And we went through the whole process. And I went out to Gaffney, South Carolina with them, and was on the show every day. In some cases, I was Jim's eyes and ears on the units that he couldn't be at when he was in A tank. I was in B tank working with the underwater miniatures crew, because I knew the film and the show inside and out. So I knew exactly what needed to happen. And in some cases, I was helping to build miniatures, and helping editorial identify shots and make sure that we were getting everything we needed to get. So it was the most amazing education.
Yeah, amazing.
That's kind of how I spend my summer.
Huh.
and fall and winter and half the next year. So
Amazing. It does seem that people like I've heard people talk about George Lucas in the same way, and obviously James Cameron as well. From what you said, allow people to kind of enter at this level and give them a certain amount of trust to kind of bridge between departments. And if their skills happen to bridge between different departments, whether it's visual effects, optical, the optical side of things, or whether it's miniature making, they let them do it. I spoke to Nilo Rodis Jamiro, who went from industrial designer to costume designer all of a sudden because Richard Marquand
Mhm.
on Return of the Jedi said, I want Nilo to give it a go. And why not? So it must be fantastic. It must have a kind of film school feel to working for somebody like that, where you're able to kind of, obviously you've got the responsibility of making a proper Hollywood movie now, but just having that ability to kind of oversee multiple different stages and multiple different disciplines as well. It must feel like a kind of a graduation of a film school.
it was grad school. It was graduate school.
Mm.
The working on the Abyss was straight up graduate school for me because it was a real project. It was all of these different areas that I could be involved in. It wasn't siloed as
Mm.
much because
Mm.
as Jim's, he used to call me his extra RAM uh, because I was there to help keep track of a lot of different things and
Mm.
to be the first line of defense when there were questions and should we do it this way, should we do it this way, well, what would Jim want, because he's so busy. Remember, as a director, you get all of these requests of, we need answers to these, give me the top 10 questions you need answered, and each department gives the top 10 questions they need answered, and then he has to take those from all the departments and figure out which 10 questions from all these departments he has the time to answer in the middle of everything else he's doing. And so my job was to kind of help that process. And he very explicitly said, I don't want you to be my executive assistant. My executive assistant is the guy who picks up my dry cleaning,
Mm.
so that I can focus on this stuff. You are a creative in this process. And that was the interesting thing. My credits on the Abyss, one was kind of a visual effects assistant to the director, and my other credit on the Abyss was creative slash technical slash research assistant to James Cameron. So it was really a amazing education. And then I kind of doubled down on that for my next film with him, which was Terminator 2, starting from the ground
Amazing.
floor.
Yeah, and amazing about both of those movies. If we just go back to the Abyss briefly, such a pivotal milestone in visual effects. Okay, maybe some people don't regard the film as successful as, say, Terminator 2 or maybe Jurassic Park or something later on. But certainly the effects work on that movie is seen very much as a turning point. It kind of opened the door to what we are experiencing now as viewers and for people working in the visual effects industry. So amazing to be able to arrive in the industry at this incredible time where the kind of old is being, not swept aside, but being pushed aside and making room for this new technology, and then ramping up again for Terminator 2. I mean, that movie probably was the film that reignited my interest in movie making. Star Wars, obviously, seeing those documentaries as a kid, but that was everywhere at the time. Everybody knew that there was this character that was made from liquid metal, and it was this brand new effect, and incredible to be working on something like that and being at the very sharp edge of where the technology was. And you've always pushed the technology, haven't you? You've always been had an interest. You're a big proponent of integrating digital technology into filmmaking.
Well, that's one of the really interesting things about Terminator 2, is people talk about this was the birth of digital. Um, digital was a very prolonged birth through a lot of small steps, and it was the one that made, I think, the biggest splash at that point in 1991. But it stands on the shoulders of the work that was done on the Abyss, and all of it. And this is the most important thing: it all came from storytelling. It came from Jim saying, "I want to do something that I have in my head. I can't figure out how to do it with the conventional technologies, and
Impossible. Yeah.
I think there's a way to do it." But I mean, there were some crazy ideas for the pseudopod in the Abyss, because it's a water tentacle, and nobody has ever seen it, but everyone would know exactly what it would look like because it's water. Everybody understands that. And so it became this process of, well, we could cover a sock puppet with front projection material and project ripples of water on it, and have it move around. There were crazy ideas. Somebody said, just shoot miles and miles of footage of somebody throwing a fire hose around, find frames that kind of match and string them together. There were some crazy ideas, but we all pretty much knew, what? We think computer graphics could do this, but we don't know. And we, during production, even ILM was saying, you may have to cut out 6 or 7 shots because we calculated the render time with our fastest systems, which were their only systems, and it'll be after your release date. So you need to cut out a few shots. And so that's why we have POV shots of the pseudopod in the movie, because those could be done optically. So it was this process of one thing, a very small part of the movie, which Jim always said, if it doesn't look right, we can always cut it out of the movie. I can make the movie story work without it. But it became that thing that everybody kind of gave, pushed the Oscar over the top in terms of awarding the film. I think all the rest of the work in the film, the miniatures, the underwater miniatures, the sets, all of those kind of things, the motion control work was phenomenal in that film as well. And they pushed the envelope on that. Jim's not about technique. He's about what is the best way to tell the story. And that was a great lesson to learn, because sometimes the tail starts wagging the dog.
Yes.
And in Terminator 2, I remember when it came out, people kept talking about, oh, this is a watershed. This character is all computer graphics generated and everything. And there were only like 3 dozen CG shots in the movie. And a few of them were actually some of the first, not counting Howard the Duck, wire removals and utility visual effects shots that were done by PDI and some other folks. And there were only a few of those visual effects shots that were computer graphics with the morphing, and the rest of it was Stan Winston practical magic. And it kind of bothered them a little bit, because there would be all these news stories where they're showing all this, look at all this amazing computer graphics, look how real it looks. And the folks from Stan Winston Studios are rightly saying some of those shots are real because they're real.
Yeah.
And they had come up with ways to vacuum metallize rubber so that it would look like chrome. So, all the arm blades, some of it's fiberglass, some of it's rubber. And they would do all these amazing things. It's all about story. It's all about how you can integrate them. I mean, we could tell the difference from shot to shot, CG, live action puppet, CG, but a lot of people couldn't. And it was all a great blend. And that's a testament to the storytelling.
Absolutely.
And that's the big thing you learn from learning visual effects right. What is its place? And, later on, even doing small visual effects shots, it's always, what are we doing to help tell the story? And that was some of the most fun I had in doing visual effects. We worked on a film called Deep Rising.
Yeah, I remember.
Stephen Summers. And there was this whole change in the ending where they wanted a character who they had killed off to still be alive at the end, because he was too entertaining a character to kill off. So they wanted to keep him in case they needed a sequel. But they had shot him in the leg. They had put him out in the ocean. And he was no way he was going to be able to swim his way to this prehistoric island at the end of the movie. But they wanted to figure out how to do that. So they came to us and said, we have an idea. we had a surfboard that was on their sampan at the beginning of the movie. And we have a shot where the sampan blows up near the end of the movie. And can you add a surfboard flying up into camera to reestablish that there's a surfboard, so that when we do the reshoots in Malibu of him coming to shore, he's paddling on the surfboard because he had a shot leg, you know, and it worked. And that was like, how do we do this? You know, we can come up with this and so on. So you can solve narrative problems through the judicious narrative creative use of visual effects. And that was a great thing to be part of, because then you feel like you're not just compositing something, you're helping to tell stories. And it gets you more invested. It's a lot harder today when there's, you know, it's not 50 shots in a movie or 300 shots. It's 2,000. It's literally every shot in the movie. So
with thousands of people
really,
working on those shots as well.
Exactly. But it's really important for everybody who's doing that to try to, you know, stay focused on the narrative, because ultimately that's what makes the film better. And it's also what keeps them invested, that they're not just button pushers and, you know, doing an assembly line of composites, you know, or elements. So, and that's one of the lessons I really learned from working in this industry for so long. I've had a very, very eclectic,
really have
career in terms of the types of materials that I've worked on. And I'm actually very proud of that, because it's not all just, you know, visual effects for movies.
Yeah. What kind of sparked your interest in the emerging digital platforms of laserdisc and DVD?
Yeah. I was a big fan of laserdisc, because I had a roommate, you know, around the time I started working for Jim, who had one of the only laser discs I ever knew of, and he was showing, oh, you know, they can do still galleries, and you know, they had these, you know, things, these little featurettes about the making of the movie, and you can jump to, you don't have to fast forward to get to them, and all this. It wasn't a linear process; it was somewhat non-linear, and it was fascinating. And so I was a big fan of those. Jim was a big fan of those. As a matter of fact, my first Laserdisc player was his birthday present to me one year.
Nice.
I think it was 1990. And so I was always into that. And when we got to finishing The Abyss for Fox, and they were starting to say, hey, you know what, we can do these Criterion type titles. You know, why don't we do this for Aliens and do this for The Abyss? And I got involved in that process as a part of Jim's team. And I started, you know, writing things, and I felt that the Criterion stuff was fantastic. The Criterion Laserdisc, they're very scholarly, they're very well done. Morgan Hawley and Alita Hawley and the folks at Criterion were really, really studious and complete in the way they were doing these things. But they had an outside perspective. They didn't work on those movies. They were just, you know, people who really knew those movies, loved those movies, and wanted to do right by them. I had been in the unique position of having worked on some of these films, and I said, what if, you know, the people who actually worked on the movie did a disc? And that's what I started with on The Abyss.
I remember that disc so well. It was one of the first laser discs I ever saw, you know, and I was kind of like, how do I get my hands on this? You know, it felt like a whole new world had just opened up.
Yeah, it was really interesting to see how the process was done. Back then, you couldn't even take a screen grab and figure out how to get it into a computer. Or out of a computer onto video. It was crazy. And this is standard definition video. This wasn't even HD or anything. But I resolved, from my standpoint of having been in the middle of everything on The Abyss, to write kind of the definitive making of, and create that with visuals and video, and use all of the frankly very limited technologies that you could have in Laserdisc to do that. And so we did it, and we even did a pan and scan version. Because at the time, rather than run away from pan and scan and disdain it, Jim at the time was saying, you know what? This is the reality. Televisions are more square. films are much wider. You've got two ways you can do it. One, you letterbox it and have a much smaller image. You get the scope of it, but you lose the intimacy. Or you pan and scan the movie, and you trade the scope, but you have the intimacy. You're closer to the characters. You can see the performances. You can see all that kind of thing. And he said, I don't need to choose between them. I can tell Fox I want to do both. And so that's what he did. But most pan and scans at the time were like, okay, set the frame to whatever you're cutting off, usually just the sides, and leave it and run the whole film that way. And then, of course, you get people half cut off on one side. You have to actually use some creative license in how you pan and how you frame each shot. And so I even devised a logo. If you look on the pan and scan package, it's a film frame with a brain in it.
Right.
Meaning, you know, intelligent pan and scanning. And I don't know how many of those sold, but you know, because now things are kind of different. People understand multiple formats, aren't so freaked out by letterbox, and aren't saying, "Hey, I paid for a whole frame. How come I'm only seeing, you know, the middle 2/3 of the frame?" So yeah, that Laserdisc was something that was, I think, something new for that industry. It was like, you know, this is kind of what some of the possibilities are. And then I doubled down on that with the Laserdisc for Terminator 2.
Yeah.
Which ended up being this huge set. And those each had their limitations too, because you can only put half an hour of high quality material on a side. You can do an hour, but it's at, you know, a lower quality. So there were all these limitations. You had to do side breaks, and I kind of got into Laserdisc doing that partially because when Terminator 2 was first coming out, Pioneer Entertainment was going to do the Laserdisc, and normally we're not involved in any of that. They just put the stuff together, have us look at it, and sign off. And I remember that day in 1991, late 1991, where it was like, man, get into my office right now. I go in there and I find out that where you choose the side breaks for a Laserdisc, because you have to choose where you're going to break, was being done by the manufacturers, not by any creatives.
Oops.
And so in the middle of the hospital chase sequence is where it suddenly goes, end of side one, please, you know, turn over. And Jim was livid. It's like, you should either start here or start here, not here in the middle of the chase sequence. So I got involved in that, and the poor lady from Pioneer, who had just sent these as kind of a courtesy to get Jim's signature on a letter that they wanted to include with the Laserdisc, had to endure me coming in and saying, yeah, we can't do it this way. You're gonna have to, you know, well, we've already pressed the disc, and we've already made all the jacket. Well, you got to trash all of them.
Huh.
And by the way, you spelled Judgment Day wrong on the artwork. Because,
yeah.
You know, over here we don't put an E on judgment.
Yeah.
So in the middle. So they had to trash their entire 26,000 disc run.
Ooh.
And I worked really closely with them and made friends with all of them, and they saw that there was somebody who understood the technology enough to care about their needs and their concerns and their limitations, but also could show them why it's important to do it this way and that way. And we hit it off really well. And so I got more involved in the technology of Laserdiscs, not just the other stuff. So that was the process by which I kind of got into those things. And then when DVD was starting to be defined as a format, there was a seminar or a kind of a colloquium in 1995 in which they invited all of these different folks from different disciplines who had used Laserdisc for various purposes to come and explain what they were doing or what they did that was forward thinking in Laserdisc. And they wanted to ask us, what do you want to see in the DVD format? You know, and we would come in and say, you know, we were able to do this, but we had to jump through hoops, and it would be great if you could just build this into the format spec, and we'd love to do seamless branching, and we would love to do all these things. And they listened, and they created this format, and when the format came out, I was one of the folks who was privileged enough to get work in designing stuff to really show off the format. Not officially as, here, we want you to show off the format. It was more like, oh, well, we want you did the T2 and the Abyss discs. We would love you to do those films for DVD because we think you can really do something progressive with it.
I remember those discs so well. And, talking about those Criterion discs there before DVD came along, what was amazing about them is they felt curated. They felt like they were handled with care. And your name over the years has become a kind of byword for that very thing, for these wonderful curated discs. And the Terminator 2 DVD I remember very well. I ended up buying a multi-region player here in the UK so that I could get one from the US sent over by a friend of mine. And just seeing later on with the special editions as well, having somebody who worked on the inside on those films, who knew what material was available and might be of interest to fans. And yeah, just really fantastic to have you there, kind of on the inside, projecting your love for those films back out into the world.
Well, thank you. It was an honor because I kind of looked at those projects as, I wish I had these when I was in film school. It was make a film school on a disc. Mm-hmm. That was really kind of what I wanted to do. It was like cover every department, talk about what they did. Here are the things we ran into. Here's how the call sheets work. Here's how it was scheduled, so that even if you were into production management, you could look, oh, they scheduled it this way because of this and this. So I tried to be as absolutely thorough as I could. And the discs were things were really labors of love. And they were things that I was very, very proud of. And then, I became one of those guys to do big movie laserdiscs or DVDs. And Fox hired me to do The Abyss, and I tried to add something new on top of all of the information in the bonus material, and being involved in the transfers. I was always involved in the transfers of Jim's movies with him, to learn things and make sure that things were the way that he wanted them and so on. But there was a new area that I could actually kind of own to some extent, and that was menus. Mm-hmm. And so I tried to do things with the menus that, weren't just, here's a frame with a couple of buttons on it. Why don't we make it immersive? Why can't it be something that brings you into the world of the film in one way or another, instead of just basically a poster, which was kind of the easiest way to do it then. And so my menus kind of got pretty labyrinthine at a certain point. But, I'd fill them with Easter eggs, the Terminator 2 disc. If you waited long enough and didn't do anything, the T1000 would morph out of, one of the menus and look at you. And
were you the first person to kind of introduce those Easter eggs, do you think?
I don't know the answer to that. I really don't know the answer to that.
It feels like it could be true.
Yeah. Well, it might be. I certainly dove into that because I always thought, reward the people who spend their time looking at things. And, you do it in movies, and you can just anything you can do to give moments of delight that don't necessarily pull you out of things. That was, then I kind of tried to up my game after those, Independence Day. I've done a couple of different, both a DVD and a Blu-ray for Independence Day. And then I got the big call, which I had been hoping for, which was they were starting to do the Star Wars movies for DVD. And so I got to bring that to fruition with Lucasfilm. That was an interesting one because the thing I had in mind was crazy, which was, I don't want to just do one menu set. I want to do 3 for every movie that was themed to a different planet featured in the movie. And I want them randomized. So every time you put in the disc, you don't know which menu you're going to get, and since it wasn't normal, you could put in the disc one day, think, oh, okay, the menus take place on Tatooine. And then next time you put in the disc, it was, oh my gosh, it's on Coruscant. And that was the fun of it. And I had to build out and figure out how to program. The poor guys at the DVD programming facilities were pulling their hair out because it's 3 times the amount of work, but they made me come in there and test them all So I'd have to go in there and test is it going to the right menu? Nope, this one's going from Tatooine. All of a sudden, the second menu is from Coruscant. We got to fix that in the programming and go through this whole process. But it was so much fun because it also gave the fans something more to look at. And it made people, come back to the disc just to look at the menus. And so I felt that I'd like to think it had an impact on how they did the redo of Star Tours, where they do that now, where they randomize things so that there's like 54 different ways you can go through Star Tours. Yeah, I'd like to think that, but I don't know. They may have already had that in design progress. Interestingly enough, I did work on the Star Tours theme park rides, and that was the whole other thing I got into as well, which was theme parks. I had some friends who in the Visual Effects Society who worked in theme parks, and they said, "Hey, we could use some of your skill in some of this," and I got involved in that. And so I had worked on, I had co-directed the test shoots for Terminator 2 3D before I had left Lightstorm. So I understood some of the theme park requirements. And when Star Tours came along that they were doing a redo, they needed to do new graphics, new displays, new skins. I wasn't involved in the actual ride portion of it, but I was involved in all the pre-show, the part where you spend most of your time. So it was, we need you to do the arrival departure boards in the spaceport and come up with and make it all accurate, because people are going to be staring at this 8 hours a day for the next decade or two, at least. And so it's got to be right. So, and I had a producer, Marianne McLean at Disney Imagineering, who was very much into, I'm going to make sure that all the partial arrival departure times are logical and that these planets are canon, and it was so much fun to kind of go through all this and some of the stuff that we built, because it'd be like, oh, we want to use this planet. Okay, we don't really do much with it. It's just mentioned in one of the ancillary novels. Can we use it? Yeah. Can we establish that there's 3 moons on it because it'll be more interesting? Okay. So now that's in official canon.
Great.
The stuff that we had come up for some of these things. So those were a lot of fun, and I ended up doing a little bit of work here and there for both the one here, in Anaheim, the Star Tours in Florida, in Tokyo, in Paris. So it was a lot of fun. I worked on a number of other theme park attractions for Walt Disney Imagineering over the course of the years as well. So that was a whole nother avenue. And meanwhile, I was still doing like DVDs and then Blu-rays. I created all the menu systems full of Easter eggs for the Hunger Games films, and it was a lot of fun to create all of those things. I also was still trying to keep my hand in visual effects, and so I would work on stuff for movies, shots here and there. And I've had a really eclectic career, and then I was also involved with the Visual Effects Society. I was on their board for a long time, like a dozen years, chaired a few committees, worked on a lot of different things. And then I was inducted into the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences in 2009, and have worked on committees there as well. And one of the quieter things that I did with both the VES and the Academy was I cut montages. I cut visual effects montages every year on my own, not compensated, to kind of like, this is the year in visual effects. And we would screen them either at the VES Awards or at the Academy Bake-Offs. And I've been doing that since 2009. I had done a VES 50 most influential montage, visual effects film montage in 2007. That I was very proud. I love to edit.
I wonder if that's still around. I'd like to see that.
Yeah, it should be available somewhere. The challenge is with all of these things is that it's copyrighted material
Of course.
from start to finish. So, you probably won't find it on YouTube. You might find it, behind the paywall at the Visual Effects Society if you're a member, things like that. But it's crazy, and I still do that. I still try to do that every year, and I will put 128 films into being represented in a 2.5-minute montage.
Wow.
Cut to music. So it's that's kind of been part of my service back to the industry. Try to inspire and say, hey, there's so many great things coming from all around the world now. Hopefully it'll inspire folks. And I understand that there have been some places in the educational sphere where they'll run some of these. They'll ask me for permission, or I get permission from the academy. They'll run them in certain classes and things just to kind of get people pumped. So
that's the most fulfilling stuff in a way, isn't it? Being able to give back and inspire a new generation to come up with new ideas.
Very much. Well, yeah, I mean, it's paying back, because there was so many. I was fortunate to have so many people, from James Cameron to Galen Hurd to all sorts of folks who were open enough to say, hey, you know what? Here's somebody who's kind of outside the box. I didn't do the Spielberg thing exactly of walking in with an empty briefcase with a brick in it and pretend that an office at Universal was my own, but I did walk onto the Fox lot with a power loader Halloween costume. And, I was fortunate enough to have a good reception to that. And it gave me a career, the start of one. The rest of it was up to me. That all culminated in the last few years. I was able to direct my own feature,
Nice.
which was which is what this Cliff background is. A movie called Cliffs of Freedom that I co-wrote and directed back and was released in theaters, very few theaters, in 2019.
Where can people find that now if they did want to check it out?
It's on Amazon. You can rent it on Amazon. You can get it from various, I think iTunes has it, Google Play. And as somebody who came from a lot of visual effects and a lot of, science fiction and those kind of movies, this is a historical Greek romantic drama that has, a lot of nothing to do with any of the stuff that I'm generally known for. But the important thing was that it's about storytelling. To me, that was the most important thing. Those are the things I learned the most from all of the process of all of these films over the years. It's not about spectacle. It's about how well do you balance the emotions? How well do you carry the performances? How well do you tell a story that can take an audience along with it? And that's what we're all trying to do, really. Even every compositor, every modeler, that's really part of their jobs. And part of it is being able to step back and realize that they're part of that process and they're not just making widgets, even though sometimes it feels that way with the kind of production lines that have and deadlines that have to go on these days.
Thanks so much for sharing your story with us. It's so great to be able to talk to somebody whose work, has inspired me. I don't know if you ever saw them, but I made some things called filmumentaries, which were feature length, kind of behind the scenes documentaries where I took the film and I just put every piece of behind the scenes that I could find, photos, videos, I'm sure ripping off from all sorts of people's work all over the place, but just trying to make this different way to watch a film. So I made one on Star Wars, Empire, Jedi, Jaws, and Raiders of the Lost Ark as well. And that was, I remember having to use DVD Studio Pro to kind of make sure my menus look good and trying to use some of the techniques that you had and put Easter eggs in there and all of that kind of stuff. And yeah, great to talk to you.
It's humbling for me to see, people get into this and if any of it is spurred on by anything I did, then I'm very proud, because that's really what it's all about. It's communicating with other people and communicating the things that excite you, or the things that you think would be interesting, or things that people could actually learn to make a living off of if you inspire them and teach them well enough. And so that's fantastic. Keep it up. You've got the torch now. So you and so many other people get to carry that and bring the next generation into this. And it's tougher because everybody's just looking at TikTok, or they're looking at, Instagram, or things like that. But um, there's purpose in all of this stuff. And I want to thank you for doing podcasts and talking to all sorts of folks from all different perspectives, because I think that's really, really important. Because the entertainment industry and culture in general are not monoliths. They're made up of all different types of folks, and every one of them has something valuable to say and to contribute. So thank you.
Thank you.
Anytime you have questions, always feel free to contact me. Take care.
Cheers.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Well, I hope you enjoyed my chat with Van Ling there. I should say that after we chatted, we got to corresponding over email, and we realised that we didn't actually chat about his time at Band from the Ranch Entertainment. So in keeping with Van's body of work, we decided to chat again, and I'll include that as a bonus episode, as if it were a DVD extra. And it's available now, and you can listen to it right after this one. Next up, I'm interviewing Mike Dawson, special effects guru. I spoke to him just a couple of days ago. Great guy. We had a really nice, relaxed chat about his career. Wow, what career he's had in special effects. Started off on Superman, is still working today on House of the Dragon for Ryan Condal. That's how I got hold of Michael, through Ryan, who's a previous guest of the podcast and friend now. We chat quite a lot on WhatsApp, and we've met up before as well. Hopefully we can meet up again soon, Ryan. Thanks for giving me the details of Mike. Really interesting guy, and I know you're going to enjoy that one. So that'll be one of the next episodes. Very difficult to research Mike Dawson, actually, because he doesn't seem to have done many interviews over the years. He's one of those guys, who's just always been working. So I know you're going to get a buzz out of listening to that one. I've also got the long-awaited Stu Phillips composer interview coming up once he sorts out his telephone issues. I'm setting a date with Pete Curran, who worked for ILM for a number of years. Talking of ILM, I'm also hoping to set up an interview with Pablo Hellman, who recently worked on The Fabelmans. More on that soon too, hopefully. In other news, Justin Berger and I are closing in on finishing our Return of the Jedi unofficial timeline book, ready for the release of the film's 40th anniversary on the 25th of May, or May 25th, as you say in the States. It's a reference book containing as many dates on the film's pre-production, production, post-production, comics, toys, everything you can think of and beyond. But in addition to that, it'll have insights from several people that worked on the film, many of whom have been guests on the podcast. So it's still very much a reference book, but with some extra added context. Pete Starling, who I mentioned in the intro, my buddy and longtime collaborator, is finishing up the cover this weekend, just gone, hoping to hear from him in the next couple of days. It'll be available on Amazon for you to order. We can't do pre-orders at the moment, but I am hoping to create a landing page on my website, filmmementaries.com, soon, so that you can sign up and be notified when it's released. So in many ways, this is another way to support the podcast without going down the Patreon route. If you want to buy the book, if you're interested in the book, I'll be posting about it on social media when it's released, but I'll also see if I can sort that landing page out. Anyway, thanks for joining me, and I hope you can do so for the next episode of the Film Mentaries podcast.